High above the city and the glass towers of one of America's most powerful financial empires, a $1 billion merger was moments away from being sealed. Executives held their breath. The CEO's pen hovered just inches from the signature line. And then, a voice broke the silence. Not a lawyer's, not a board member's, but a teenage girl standing quietly in the doorway, 16 years old, wearing a janitor's badge. "Excuse me," she said, "but this clause, it's a trap. If you sign it, your company takes the fall." The room froze. What followed was a chain of events no one could have predicted, an unraveling of deception that reached from offshore accounts to the very core of a $1 billion conspiracy. This wasn't just about a contract. This was about betrayal, power, and one girl's refusal to look the other way. She was ignored, dismissed, threatened, but never silenced. And when she took the witness stand, the entire country had to listen. This is the true story of how a janitor's daughter exposed the elite, changed the future of a corporation, and reminded the world that truth doesn't depend on your title. It depends on your courage. Welcome to The Black Girl Who Exposed a $1 billion Lie and the Sentence That Made Wall Street Tremble. If you believe power only belongs to the wealthy, just wait until you see what she did. The boardroom on the 30th floor of Whitmore Capital had never known silence like this. Not the thick, respectful pause before a critical vote. Not the hesitant quiet before a $1 billion decision. This was different, uninvited, piercing, a hush carved by disbelief. Because standing in the doorway, in scuffed sneakers and a maintenance visitor badge that caught the light awkwardly on her chest, was a girl, 16 at most, and she had just interrupted a corporate merger that took 8 months to build. Her name was Imani Carter. "This clause, it flips the risk," she said, her voice clear but laced with urgency. "If you sign it, sir, your company inherits the liability." The statement landed in the room like a dropped glass, sudden, sharp, irreparable. Grant Whitmore's pen froze mid-air, just inches from the signature line. His face, usually composed with boardroom serenity, hardened into confusion. He wasn't a man used to being interrupted, let alone by a teenager. Beside him, Vanessa Whitmore's lips parted in sharp disbelief, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. She glanced between her husband and the girl at the door, trying to process what she was witnessing. From across the table, Trevor Blake, Texas-born, silk-tongued, and slippery as oil, chuckled softly. "I'm sorry, come again?" he said, his voice oozing practiced charm. "You're saying there's a problem? In the deal?" Imani didn't blink. Page 14, paragraph C, subsection 3. The wording redirects all post-merger liability to Whitmore Capital. It means if anything collapses, legally or financially, your firm takes the hit, while Blake Partners walks away untouched. Now they were listening. Around the massive conference table, junior analysts exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with a digital pad, frantically scrolled to the mentioned clause. Another pulled the printed contract closer, flipping pages with shaky fingers. An uncomfortable energy crept over the room like fog, doubt. "She doesn't even belong here," someone whispered behind a coffee urn. "She's the janitor's daughter," another murmured, like that explained the logic-defying moment unfolding before them. But Imani stood motionless. She didn't flinch under the weight of their stares, didn't retreat when their expressions shifted from surprise to irritation. She had already weighed the cost. Now she was here to bear it. Just 8 hours earlier, she had been invisible. The night shift at Whitmore Capital began like most others. Long after the investors, advisors, and associates had left the building, the hallways belonged to the cleaners, the people who erased the traces of daily ambition. Rhonda Carter, Imani's mother, knew every inch of those marble floors. She moved through them with quiet efficiency, her cart rattling gently, her earbuds playing old gospel hymns on loop. Imani accompanied her often, not because she had to, but because it was the only time they got to spend together. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Imani didn't mind the quiet of the towers after hours. It gave her time to think, to study, to wonder what it must be like to sit behind those glass walls in daylight, speaking numbers into power. She wore her usual hoodie, navy, faded at the sleeves, and a visitor's badge that allowed her to help her mother without raising alarms. She was careful not to touch anything important. That was rule 1. "We clean," her mother always said, "not snoop." But that night, something felt off. While collecting shredded paper from the second-floor printing suite, Imani noticed a thick folder left in the copier tray. It wasn't buried under other documents or placed out of reach. It was left there carelessly, like a gift or a trap. On the cover, stamped in bold, "Final Draft, Whitmore-Blake Merger Agreement." She knew she should walk away, but curiosity wasn't what stopped her. Instinct did. Something deep, primal, told her to look. So she opened it. The legal jargon should have been too dense for someone her age. But Imani had always been different. While most teens obsessed over TikTok dances and fashion hauls, she read articles on market collapses. Her grandfather used to call her his little lawyer, watching documentaries with her about the Lehman Brothers implosion and the rise of whistleblowers. When her classmates asked why she didn't care about influencers, she'd reply simply, "Because I want to influence real things." That night, she flipped through the pages of the merger document with the precision of someone who had done this before in her mind 100 times. It was buried deep. Paragraph C, line 3. The language was subtle, nearly invisible beneath a tide of common phrasing. But there it was, a clause that offloaded all post-merger liability to Whitmore Capital. In plain terms, if Blake's firm was hiding fraud, failed obligations, or legal disputes, Grant's company would absorb every lawsuit. Imani's heart pounded, her throat tightened. Was this really happening? She looked up from the paper, suddenly cold despite the warm office air. She felt the building shift around her, monolithic and hollow, a skyscraper perched atop a trap door. She whispered, "Mom, have you ever seen something like this?" From down the hall, Rhonda responded flatly while polishing the glass wall. "Don't touch what ain't yours, Imani. You trying to get us fired?" "I'm serious, Mom. This thing, it's dangerous," her mother sighed. "So is being black and broke in a room full of suits. Now stop before someone sees you." Imani wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just stared at the claws again. She knew what she saw, and she knew they wouldn't believe her. But maybe, just maybe, one man would hesitate long enough to check. Now, standing in the conference room doorway, all eyes on her, she braced for rejection. "Mr. Whitmore," she said again, gently but firmly, "if you sign that deal, your legacy, your company, might not survive what's hiding in that contract." The CEO's voice came slow, like he was digesting something raw. "You're saying my team missed this?" "I'm saying it was written to be missed." Vanessa shot her husband a glare, her voice slicing through the air. "This is absurd, Grant. She's a child." But Grant wasn't looking at Vanessa. He had the contract in hand. He flipped to page 14. Read. Paused. Then, his jaw tensed. Trevor Blake leaned forward, his southern lilt still sweet. "Are we really taking legal advice from a teenager in gym shoes?" Imani's cheeks flushed, but she didn't flinch. "You can laugh," she said. "But if he signs that, your company's name will be on every headline when the lawsuits come crashing down." Another silence. This one stretched. Grant slowly lowered the pen. "Escort her out," he said finally. Security approached. Imani didn't resist. She turned and walked, calm, dignified, even as the men in black suits flanked her. But before the door closed, she glanced back. Just once. In that fleeting moment, Grant Whitmore didn't see a janitor's daughter. He saw something else entirely. A red flag. A reflection. A crack in the glass just wide enough to see the truth. And he didn't sign. The next morning, the marble lobby of Whitmore Capital was eerily quiet. Not the kind of silence that came with early hours, but the kind that lingered like smoke after a fire. Imani Carter sat rigidly on a cold metal chair in the security office, her hands folded tightly in her lap, chin raised despite the pressure mounting in her chest. The walls were a pale gray, the kind that swallowed color, comfort, and confidence. Her mother, Rhonda, sat beside her, shoulders stiff, expression unreadable, not speaking a single word since they were pulled off the night shift 2 hours earlier and told simply to wait. No explanation, no apology, just 2 chairs and a closed door. Imani tried to steady her breathing, eyes locked on the polished floor, where the reflection of the morning light shimmered like a quiet accusation. Time passed slowly, painfully, each minute stretching across the heavy silence between her and the woman who had spent her whole life scrubbing silence into these floors. "I'm sorry, Mom," Imani whispered finally, the words barely rising above breath. Rhonda turned her head slowly, her voice low and flat. You should be. Her words landed like a slap, not loud, not cruel, but heavy with something deeper. I clean this building so we have food. I keep my head down so you can keep going to school, not so you can crash boardrooms like you run the place. Imani's throat clenched. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I saw something wrong, something dangerous. I couldn't let him sign it, Mom. It would have destroyed everything. Rhonda looked away, her eyes fixed on nothing. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Imani wondered if her voice had finally broken the last bond between them. Then, softer than before, Rhonda said, I raised you to be brave, Imani, but I didn't raise you to be reckless. Before Imani could respond, the door opened with a sharp click. A woman in a gray suit, clipboard in hand, heels tapping like accusations, stepped into the room. She didn't bother with a greeting. Mrs. Carter, she said, not looking at Imani. You've been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. We'll contact you with further notice. That was all. She turned and walked out just as quickly. Rhonda stood slowly, exhaling through her nose, eyes narrowed with restrained fury. She placed a firm hand on Imani's arm. Let's go, she said. As they exited the building, the cold Atlanta air bit into Imani's cheeks, sharp and unrelenting. She turned her head once, gazing back at the towering glass building that seemed so untouchable the night before. Now it felt distant, impenetrable, and cruel. They walked in silence. Buses groaned by, people passed with coffee cups and earbuds, unaware that a girl who had just saved a company was now treated like she didn't belong. At home, their apartment was small but warm, cluttered with the comfortable signs of a life built on sacrifice. Textbooks on the dining table, coupons clipped to the fridge, a half-finished jigsaw puzzle by the window. Imani curled into the couch with a mug of cocoa, her hands wrapped tightly around it, though the drink had long gone cold. Across the room, Rhonda sat at the laptop, eyes scanning job listings, jaw set. Imani wanted to speak, to ask if she'd ever forgive her. But the words stuck. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Rhonda sighed, not turning. I regret that you had to be the one to notice, that you had to carry that alone. I regret that a 16-year-old girl has to protect people who get paid to know better. Imani looked down. She didn't disagree. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the soft click of keys. Then a ping. Imani reached for the phone. One new email. No subject line. The sender, Malik Grant. She frowned. The name wasn't familiar. She clicked. Just a single sentence. You saw it too? Her eyes widened. Her heart skipped. She opened the message. Inside was another line. I used to work at Whitmore. I know what you found. If you're willing to talk, I'll listen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. Then, without hesitating, she began to type. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't crazy. And more importantly, maybe she wasn't alone. That evening, as the city dimmed under a wash of amber light and distant sirens, Imani Carter sat hunched at the kitchen table, earbuds in, listening to the voice of Malik Grant on a scrambled call line that buzzed softly at the edges, like a half-kept secret. He spoke in quick, clipped sentences, each word tinged with urgency and exhaustion. I was compliance, he said. 6 years. I flagged that exact language once, almost identical, when Blake tried to merge with Archon Technologies. But they buried it, and they buried me with it. Imani said nothing at first. Her fingers clutched a pen, scribbling keywords into a battered spiral notebook. Indemnification, contingent exposure, fiduciary trap. Words she didn't fully understand, but instinctively knew, were sharp as razors in corporate law. Malik's voice lowered. Trevor Blake doesn't make honest deals. He writes safety for himself into the fine print. Buries liability deep enough your own legal team misses it. Then when everything crashes, he's already cashed out and vanished. Imani's breath caught. And no one noticed? People noticed, Malik said flatly, but no one said it out loud, until now. And now you did. Her pulse thumped in her ears. But I'm just a kid. Exactly, Malik said. And that's why they didn't see you coming. Imani sat in silence for a moment. Across the room, her mother folded laundry in silence, glancing up occasionally, eyes unreadable. Imani muted the mic. He says this has happened before, she said. That Blake is a repeat predator. Rhonda didn't respond, just folded a sweater and stacked it with deliberate care. Later that night, after the call ended and Imani's mind refused to rest, she pulled out the contract again, the one she had copied page by page before being escorted out. The clause glared back at her, no less dangerous, no less deliberate. And in that silence, she began connecting the dots. The next morning, on the top floor of Whitmore Capital, Grant Whitmore stared at that same contract, its pages now splayed across his mahogany desk like a post-mortem. He traced the clause again with his index finger, as if daring it to disappear. He had reviewed it 5 times since that girl said the words out loud, and each time, it screamed louder. "You almost handed your empire to a ghost." He reached for a folder locked in his private safe, its tab marked Internal Risk Audit, Classified, Barnes Grant Oversight. He flipped through pages long ignored. Whistleblower warnings, financial irregularities, legal exposure summaries. One note scrawled in red ink stood out. "If they sneak one clause past us, we're finished. Monsieur Grant." That's when he realized Malik had seen it before and had been ignored. His phone buzzed again. Vanessa. "You didn't sign it, did you?" she asked without greeting. Her voice was brittle, rehearsed. "No," Grant replied coldly. "You're overreacting," she said too quickly. "You're letting some teenager get in your head." He paused. She saw what our whole legal team missed. A pause. Then her tone sharpened. "She's a child. You're choosing her word over mine?" "I'm choosing facts," he said, then hung up. An hour later, Imani sat curled on the worn couch at home, flipping through PDFs Malik had sent, encrypted files, merger history, shell companies. She highlighted language that mirrored the Whitmore contract almost word for word. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a strategy. "I can't believe he's married to that woman," she muttered. Rhonda, washing dishes behind her, let out a tired snort. "Power marries ambition. Been that way since the Romans." At that same hour, in a private gold-laced lounge downtown, Grant sat alone at the bar. He wasn't drinking, he was watching. Through the frosted divider, he could see Vanessa. Across from her sat Trevor Blake. They were laughing, her hand on his wrist, his grin too wide to be business. Then, casually, Blake slid something small across the table. A flash drive. Vanessa took it with a smooth, practiced motion, then brushed his fingers. Grant stood abruptly. He left without finishing his drink. Rage, betrayal, nausea. He couldn't tell them apart anymore. Back at home, Imani's phone buzzed again. A new message from Malik. Check her financial trail. Cayman, Zurich, Virgin Islands. She's in on it. Imani's heart sank. She opened her laptop, breath shaky. She began scanning public transfer records, offshore disclosures, dormant trust accounts. It didn't take long. Vanessa Whitmore's name was tied to at least 3 hidden entities, all linked to corporate fallout from previous Blake mergers. At the same moment, Grant received an alert from his bank's compliance team. Unauthorized attempt to transfer $2.5 million from Whitmore's dormant reserve fund. Request initiated by V. Whitmore. Blocked. Barely. He dropped into his chair, the room spinning. The noose wasn't just around the company. It was inside his home. That night, in 3 separate corners of the city, none of them slept. Grant Whitmore, realizing his empire was built on a rotting foundation. Imani Carter, holding the threads of a conspiracy too large for any teenager to carry. And Vanessa Whitmore, whispering to Trevor Blake from the back seat of a black SUV. "He's digging," she said. Trevor's reply was calm, deadly. "Then we bury him before he reaches the roots." It started with a nameless email, no subject line, no sender, just a single audio file attached. Grant Whitmore sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, the skyline of Atlanta humming silently beyond the tall glass windows, blinking with wealth and wonder and lies. The silence was different now, not peaceful, not productive. It felt alert, suspicious, like the entire building was holding its breath, waiting to see what the man at its center would do. He hovered over the file, then finally clicked play. The recording crackled for a second, then came Vanessa's voice, cool, measured, chilling. "He won't question it, not if I push at the right time. A second later, Trevor Blake's voice slid into the conversation like oil into water. And if he does, we remind him what he has to lose. Grant froze. He listened again, then a third time, and something broke in him. Not loudly, not visibly, but irreversibly. He forwarded the file to his private attorney, then sat back and stared at the ceiling, not with confusion, but with clarity. Vanessa hadn't just known. She hadn't just enabled it. She had engineered the betrayal from within his home. She had chosen power over partnership, deceit over devotion. And now, the walls he'd built for decades had turned against him brick by brick. Across town, Imani stood in front of the grand doors of the Atlanta Public Library, gripping a folder and a flash drive Malik had sent her that morning. Her hands were numb, not from the cold, but from what she was about to do. Inside the building's hushed computer lab, she sat down, pulled out the handwritten decryption key, and began unlocking files. Reports poured onto the screen. 3 previous merger deals, 3 collapsed companies, all connected to Trevor Blake. And deep in the metadata, in the digital fingerprints behind the approvals, one name kept surfacing. Vanessa Whitmore. She wasn't just helping, she had been orchestrating for years. That evening, Imani tried to deliver the files to Malik at his apartment, but when she got there, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, no lights, no signs of a struggle, no Malik. Just an envelope on the table with 2 letters on the front. I see. She opened it slowly. Inside, a thumb drive, and a yellow post-it note that read, "They know I'm helping you. Don't come back here. Find someone you trust, soon." Imani's breath hitched. Her hands shook. She clutched the envelope to her chest, stepped backward, and left. Fast. Meanwhile, Grant sat in his car parked outside an old courthouse no longer in use. He wasn't here to see a judge. He was here to meet Elena Cruz, a civil rights attorney who had made her career taking down corporate corruption cases no one else dared touch. She entered without fanfare, her long coat trailing behind her like a silent banner of purpose. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, settling into the passenger seat, "you came to the right person, but this isn't just merger fraud. This is systemic financial subversion." Grant didn't flinch. "I know. I want to protect my company." He paused. "And I want to protect the girl who saw it first." Elena's brow arched, curiosity sharpening in her gaze. "A girl?" "Imani Carter, 16, the janitor's daughter." Elena's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Then she may be our most powerful witness." The next morning, Imani returned to the Whitmore building. Security was doubled. She wasn't on the list. So she waited. Outside, cold fingers wrapped around a plastic bag of evidence, eyes focused on the revolving glass doors. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, one of the junior staffers, someone she recognized from vacuuming the West Wing, walked by, glanced around, and whispered, "Mr. Whitmore said, if you ever came back, I'm to take you straight up." Imani followed, silent but steady. Her sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened to the top floor, Grant was already waiting. He didn't greet her as a CEO. He extended a hand like a man who had seen his own failure reflected back through the eyes of a child. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I owe you the truth." Imani nodded, her voice low but unwavering. "Then, let's bring it out before someone else disappears." They entered the private conference room. A storm of files, diagrams, laptops, audio devices, and legal binders stretched across the massive table like war plans. Elena Cruz entered moments later, her eyes meeting Imani's. "This is your battlefield now," she said quietly. "But if we move smart, we win before they even realize it's a fight." Imani took a breath, then sat down at the table, her backpack full of stolen truths, now the cornerstone of a war no one had seen coming. And for the first time in this battle, she wasn't alone. Inside the sleek walls of Whitmore Capital's once celebrated top floor, the atmosphere had shifted. Gone were the decorative accolades of high finance and glass trophies reflecting sunlight with arrogance, replaced now by a forest of whiteboards crammed with red-threaded timelines, account numbers, flow charts, and offshore destinations written in sharp, urgent strokes. In the center of this chaos sat Imani Carter, hunched over a borrowed laptop, sleeves pushed up, her fingers tracing emails with timestamps too precise to be coincidental. She wasn't just reading documents anymore. She was mapping betrayal. Elena Cruz paced the perimeter, phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped but calm. Grant stood by the window, arms folded, staring out across a city that now looked different to him. Not because the skyline had changed, but because for the first time, he was seeing it without illusion. Elena ended the call and turned. That was my contact at the Department of Justice. They're monitoring Vaughn quietly, but they need more. Concrete, irrefutable, undeniable. Imani unzipped her backpack and pulled out a mustard yellow folder. She slid it across the table. This came from Malik, before he vanished. Grant opened it slowly. Offshore account ledgers, international transfer slips, corporate shell formations. And at the center, 3 names: Vanessa Whitmore, Trevor Blake, Ravencross Holdings, a shell entity based in Basel, Switzerland, acting as the primary recipient of funds from previous failed mergers. Funds rerouted every quarter through silent, deliberate channels. Elena exhaled, whistling low. "This is bigger than Blake," she murmured. "It's a model, a machine, predatory capitalism on autopilot." Grant's voice was tight, bitter. "And it all happened under my roof." That evening, on the fire escape of their apartment, Imani and Rhonda sat in silence as the city buzzed below. Taxi horns, soft music from street corners, the clink of dishes from open-air patios. Rhonda passed her daughter a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Her hands trembled slightly. "They called," she said softly. "Told me if I don't keep quiet, your school records could disappear. Said they can make things vanish." Imani stared into the steam rising from her cup. "They already tried. They won't stop." "You're still a child," Rhonda whispered. "You shouldn't have to fight this." Imani didn't raise her voice, didn't look up. "I became part of this the second they decided people like us were invisible." Rhonda turned to her, eyes wet, uncertain. But in her daughter's face, she didn't see rebellion. She saw something far more terrifying and powerful: purpose, clarity, resolve. The next day, the Whitmore Foundation hosted its annual charity gala. Once Vanessa's domain, it was now under Grant's control. He wore a black tuxedo, but his smile had vanished. As guests sipped champagne and chatted beneath the crystal chandeliers, he took the stage with deliberate steps. The room fell quiet. "Before we begin tonight's program," he said, "I'd like to say something, not as a CEO, not as a man with assets and influence, but as a human being who let the wrong people stand too close for too long." The room stiffened, eyes darted. Vanessa froze by the champagne tower. Her fingers tightened on the glass. "I once believed trust was found in numbers, but numbers don't betray you. People do. I reopened every contract, every agreement, and I found what a 16-year-old girl discovered, buried in the fine print." Whispers rippled. Some turned to Vanessa. Others simply listened, stunned. "And from this day forward," Grant said quietly, "we will see her." He stepped off the stage and walked away. No questions, no follow-ups. Just the truth dropped like a match in a dry room. That night, back in her small bedroom, Imani sat cross-legged on the floor, the glow of her laptop casting a dim halo around her. The screen displayed dozens of flagged emails. One line from Vanessa to Trevor, catching her eye like a blade under moonlight. "He's pulling away! You know what to do!" Just as she began copying the file to a secure drive, the screen flickered, then black. Her phone vibrated violently in her lap. One message, no name, no number, just 4 words. "Stop digging, or we dig first." Her heart slammed against her ribs, her fingers froze. Then slowly she pulled out a Sharpie, reached for a fresh notebook page, and wrote 3 words in thick, black ink: "Not backing down." Because this wasn't just corporate now. It wasn't just legal. It wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was a war against everything they thought she couldn't be. And the girl they believed would stay quiet had just declared she wouldn't. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta's financial district, the whispers had already begun circulating beneath polished boardroom tables and espresso machines in corner lounges. Some murmured that Whitmore Capital was conducting an internal compliance audit. Others said someone had found blood in the water, but no one dared to say the name out loud: Imani Carter. She had become myth, a ghost in the machine, a story assistants shared in the half-hushed awe. The janitor's daughter who stopped a billion-dollar merger. Upstairs, in his office that now resembled a legal war room more than a CEO suite, Grant Whitmore stood staring out the window while Elena Cruz flipped through documents with a pen tucked behind her ear. She looked up. They've frozen 3 of Blake's shell accounts in the Caymans, but DOJ still won't move until we file a public witness statement. Grant clenched his jaw. What would that take? Elena paused. Someone willing to go public, someone willing to take the risk. Grant inhaled slowly. Then I'll do it. That afternoon, Imani returned from school to find a crowd outside their apartment building. Neighbors, reporters, a few strangers holding handwritten signs. We believe Imani. Truth has no age. She stopped at the sidewalk, stunned. Her mother appeared beside her, clutching grocery bags. They're not here to scare you, Rhonda whispered. They're here to thank you. But not everyone was grateful. Across town, behind smoked glass in a luxury high-rise suite, Vanessa Whitmore stood pacing while Trevor Blake scrolled silently through a tablet. On the screen, a pause news clip showing Imani's face blurred beside Grant and Elena outside the courthouse steps. Vanessa's tone was sharp. She's still a kid. You really think she can bring us down? Trevor's voice was cold steel. Kids don't bring down empires, he said. Symbols do. He slammed the tablet shut and walked toward the door. Let's break her before she becomes one. The next morning, courtroom 17B was packed, press rows lined, legal interns elbowing for space, jury members shifting in stiff chairs under the weight of anticipation. Grant adjusted his tie. Elena whispered something to the clerk, and Imani sat 2 rows behind them, her hair braided neatly, her eyes unwavering. Trevor and Vanessa entered side by side, flanked by lawyers in pinstripes. Their eyes scanned the room like predators pretending to be diplomats. The judge entered. All rise. Elena began with precision. Not drama, not fire, just the relentless march of evidence. Shell corporations, ghost bank accounts, falsified audits. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Your Honor, Elena said, standing. I'd like to call Imani Carter to the stand. A hush swept the room like a held breath. Reporters scribbled. Cameras clicked. Imani rose and walked to the front, not like a child in over her head, but like the only one in the room who had dared to look beneath the surface. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore in, sat. Elena's voice softened. Miss Carter, how did you come to be involved in this matter? I was helping my mom clean the 30th floor, Imani answered. I saw a document in the copier room. It didn't look right, and when I read it, it didn't feel right either. What stood out to you? Elena asked. There was a clause, hidden. It shifted all responsibility from Blake's firm to Whitmore Capital. If anything went wrong, only one side would suffer. It didn't seem like an oversight. It felt intentional. And why did you speak up? Elena asked. No one asked you to. Imani looked straight ahead, her voice steady. Because just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt. The room froze. Even the judge's brow lifted slightly. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Trevor's mouth twitched. Then came the cross-examination. Blake's defense attorney, a man with too smooth hair and a voice like sandpaper, stood and began his line of attack. Miss Carter, do you have a degree in contract law? No, sir. Do you even understand what indemnity means? Not exactly, she replied. But I know when someone's hiding something. So you're accusing billion-dollar firms of fraud based on a hunch? Imani didn't flinch. I'm pointing to facts everyone else ignored. And what makes you think you're right? He pressed. Because I had nothing to gain by speaking up, and everything to lose. The jury leaned forward. For the first time, they didn't see a girl. They saw a warning, a reckoning, and a voice that couldn't be discredited. When recess was called, the buzz in the courthouse was electric. Lawyers whispered, journalists scrambled, and Elena turned to Grant. It's working, she said quietly. She just changed the whole rhythm of this case. Outside, the city didn't yet know the verdict, but inside that courtroom, something irreversible had happened. Imani Carter hadn't just testified. She had shifted the gravity. The tower that once looked unshakable had started to tilt, and no amount of titles or tailored suits could hold it upright much longer. As the courtroom emptied for the midday recess, whispers rippled like tremors under marble floors. Lawyers leaned in close behind briefcases. Reporters dashed for hallway signal, breathlessly dictating notes into their phones. But at the center of it all, Imani Carter sat still on the witness bench, her eyes following the slivers of sunlight crawling across the polished tiles. Her words, "Just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt," still echoed in the room long after it emptied. Behind her, Elena Cruz and Grant Whitmore conferred in hushed tones. Not about strategy, not anymore. About safety. The air had changed. This wasn't just a trial. It was a war for narrative, power, and legacy. And the opposing side had stopped pretending they played fair. That afternoon, Grant took the stand. Elena asked only one question. "What made you believe her?" The courtroom leaned in. Grant looked toward the jury, then toward Imani. "Because somewhere along the way," he said, voice low, "I forgot that integrity doesn't come with a title. Sometimes the people closest to the ground see the cracks first." Then, for the first time since the trial began, Vanessa Whitmore was called. She entered the witness box with poise, a slate-gray suit tailored to perfection, her lips pressed into a sculpted calm. But when Elena played the audio recording, the one where Vanessa said, "He won't question it if I push at the right time," the calm shattered. Vanessa's fingers twitched, her shoulders tensed, and for the first time, her words came out unpolished. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, voice thin, distant. "I thought I was helping the deal, helping Grant. I thought if I just pushed it through, he'd never have to know." Elena didn't blink. And when Imani exposed it, silence, then a crack in Vanessa's voice. "I wanted her gone, because she saw everything I tried to hide." Outside, news vans gathered like crows. The courthouse steps buzzed with speculation. Inside, the verdict loomed like a shadow. The next morning, the jury filed in, solemn, tight-jawed, eyes unreadable. Imani sat between Elena and her mother, clutching the edge of her skirt with white knuckles. Across the aisle, Vanessa stared at the floor. Trevor Blake, still smug, barely concealed his boredom. The judge called for silence. On the count of conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, guilty. On the count of falsifying financial documents, guilty. On the count of obstruction and legal tampering, guilty. Each word fell like a hammer against a stone wall, until finally the empire cracked. Trevor's smirk faded. Vanessa closed her eyes, her world narrowing to a gray corner of memory and regret. The sentence was swift. 10 years in federal prison, no parole for 7. Outside, reporters surged forward, microphones extended like weapons. "Imani, how does it feel to be the girl who saved Whitmore Capital? Mr. Whitmore, will you rebuild? Elena, what's next for your witness?" Imani answered only one question. "What do you want people to remember from this trial?" She paused, then looked straight into the nearest camera. "That truth doesn't depend on your title, and justice doesn't care how clean your shoes are." The following weeks moved quickly. Whitmore Capital didn't collapse. It transformed. Grant purged the board, restructured oversight, appointed Elena Cruz as chief ethics counsel, and publicly announced the Imani Carter Fellowship, a full-ride scholarship for underprivileged students with a voice and vision. He gave the first award in the very building Imani once cleaned. "Today," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "we honor not a mistake, but the one who caught it." Imani didn't just protect this company. She reminded us what we should have been protecting all along, our principles. Imani stood beside him in a pressed white blouse and blazer, no longer just the janitor's daughter, no longer just the girl who saw the claws. She was the symbol they never expected, and the one no one could now ignore. That night, in Grant's office, lit only by the golden glow of Atlanta's skyline, Imani stood by the window. "I got my Columbia acceptance," she said quietly, holding out the manila envelope like a secret she was finally ready to share. Grant smiled. "You earned more than that. You've got a seat at any table you walk into now." She hesitated. "Do you regret it, all of this?" He looked out the window, the glass reflecting the rebuilt city and the girl who helped reshape it. "I regret that I didn't see it coming," he said, "but I don't regret who stood up when I couldn't." She nodded once and placed the envelope gently on his desk. In another corner of the state, Vanessa Whitmore was processed into a federal detention facility in handcuffs and silence. She made no appeal, no statement. Her empire had been reduced to a line in the news and a lesson in the courtroom. In his office, Grant placed Imani's envelope on the top shelf of his bookcase, beside framed awards and a new plaque with 6 engraved words. Truth isn't loud, but it lasts. And just like that, from the girl they dismissed, a legacy was rewritten, not through fury or wealth or revenge, but with one clause, one voice, and a refusal to look away. In the months that followed the verdict, the city of Atlanta began to change in ways both visible and unseen. Though no official announcement marked the shift, no grand gesture signaled the new era, people simply started whispering differently, walking differently, looking over their shoulders not just in fear, but in awareness. Because if a 16-year-old girl with scuffed shoes and no title could unseat giants, then no corner office was too high to fall, and no truth too small to matter. And within the sleek towers of Whitmore Capitol, the entire corporate structure began to pulse with a new rhythm, not of unchecked ambition, but of caution, of accountability, of measured respect for silence that once swept the floors now echoing at the highest level of decision-making. And at the heart of it all, Imani Carter walked those marble halls not with arrogance, but with quiet clarity, a presence that made interns straighten their backs and executives clear their throats. Not because she demanded power, but because she embodied it without asking, because she had become the name whispered in ethics workshops, the case study law students pored over, the slide in orientation decks titled "The Clause That Changed Everything." And while reporters occasionally spotted her ducking out of side entrances, avoiding attention, still clutching her worn canvas backpack, the story followed her like shadow, never letting her go, but never weighing her down either, because she carried it not as burden, but as compass. In a new wing of the building that now bore her name, the Imani Carter Fellowship Office buzzed with applications from students across the country, kids from neighborhoods with no trust funds, from households that survived check to check, from families that told them to stay small so they wouldn't get hurt. And yet, these kids wrote essays about speaking up, about seeing the dirt no one else noticed, and believing that one voice could still matter in rooms that tried to drown them out. Meanwhile, far from the gleaming boardrooms, in a federal detention facility in Wisconsin, Vanessa Whitmore woke each morning in silence, her days a monotonous cycle of shadows and memory. And while the world moved on, she remained haunted not by headlines or court transcripts, but by a single line that echoed through her sleepless nights. "Just because I clean your floors doesn't mean I don't see the dirt," a phrase that once drew laughter from boardroom lips, now etched into public conscience like a prophecy, like a warning. And she would replay that phrase over and over in her mind, as if searching for a loophole, a clause of her own to undo the collapse. But there was none. Back in the city, Grant Whitmore stepped into the newly remodeled atrium of his company, its high ceilings now etched with the names of those who rebuilt it, its mission statement rewritten, to start not with profit but with purpose. And at the center of it all stood a glass case holding the original merger contract, never signed, open to page 14, paragraph C, subsection 3, with a red circle drawn around the line that nearly destroyed everything, and beside it, a small bronze plate engraved with the words, "Discovered by Imani Carter, age 16. Tour groups of interns and visiting executives stopped here now, pausing not for spectacle, but for reminder that power unchecked will always find its limit in those willing to speak. Later that week, Elena Cruz stood at a press podium announcing a national initiative inspired by the Carter case, a federal ethics education program designed for public high schools. And when asked by a reporter if she thought the system had changed enough, she smiled faintly and said, "Not enough, but it started when one girl said no one else would read the fine print, so she did." That evening, Imani sat with her mother on the fire escape once more, their mugs steaming under the cool spring night. And Rhonda looked over at her daughter, not as a mother fearing for her child's safety, but as a woman seeing her reflection in someone who went further than she ever thought possible. And she said, "You know they'll come for you again one day, right? They'll try to twist this, try to rewrite what you did." And Imani, eyes calm, replied, "Then I'll just keep writing it back." And they clinked their mugs like a quiet vow. Somewhere, in a quiet corner of her laptop, Imani opened a new folder, labeled simply, "Whistle Files, Future Cases," and inside it, a single document sat waiting, blank for now, but not for long, because the war may have ended in one courtroom, but the battle for truth never really sleeps. And the girl who once stood in the doorway of a boardroom, with nothing but instinct, now held a seat at every table she chose. Not because they offered it, but because she had earned it, written it, and lived it into existence. The storm had passed, or so it seemed from the outside, from the glossy headlines that framed Imani Carter as the girl who saved a corporation, from the social media posts praising her courage, from the interviews Grant Whitmore gave about integrity and second chances. But beneath the celebration, in the quiet cracks of reality, the backlash stirred, not loud, but calculated, because truth has a cost, and power does not forgive the ones who expose its rot. And while Imani walked the halls of Whitmore Capital, now with a badge that granted her full access, she also walked with eyes on her back, with emails that arrived blank, with phone calls that clicked and disconnected before she could answer, with teachers who suddenly claimed her assignments were late, though they weren't, with classmates who once ignored her, now avoiding her entirely, and a school principal who summoned her one afternoon, not with congratulations, but with a warning. "There's been a complaint," he said, folding his hands tightly on the desk, "about you being emotionally disruptive, a distraction." Imani blinked. "I haven't even been in class all week." "Still," he said, avoiding her gaze, "some parents feel your presence draws too much attention." Outside his office, she could see her peers through the glass, glancing, whispering, watching her like she was a storm about to happen. That night, her mother answered a landline call and listened in silence before slowly hanging up. "That was the district board," she said, her voice calm but trembling. "They're reopening my employment status. Someone flagged me as a conflict of interest." Imani stared. "They're trying to shut us up," she whispered. Rhonda looked at her daughter and didn't answer. She didn't need to, because they both knew the system rarely changed willingly. It resisted, it recoiled, and sometimes it retaliated. The next day, Elena filed a formal injunction against Blake Industries, requesting an emergency audit and whistleblower protection status for Imani Carter and Rhonda Carter under federal statute. The media caught it before noon. By sunset, it was on every news channel. Teen who uncovered merger scandal, faces school retaliation, civil rights lawyers step in. Online support swelled, but so did doubt. Anonymous accounts flooded threads with accusations. "She's just a kid. How could she have known? This is all staged. Grant is using her for PR." Imani read them all, every comment, every slur, every conspiracy. Then she closed her laptop, not in retreat, but in preparation. That night, she received a direct message from an unknown account. Just 4 words: "She's not worth it." She stared at the screen, then picked up the phone and called Elena. "Can you get federal eyes on this?" "They're watching," Elena replied, "but they need someone willing to testify, publicly." Silence stretched. Then, "I will," said Grant Whitmore. The next morning, the Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story. Though now based in Atlanta, the scale of the case had spread nationwide. CEO exposes internal fraud. After janitor's daughter flags hidden clause. FBI opens wider inquiry. Grant stood at a press conference flanked by Elena Cruz and 2 federal agents, his voice steady, but stripped of performance. "I was blind," he said, "not just to the fraud, but to the courage sitting in my own lobby. A girl saved my company, the same girl our system never even saw." Behind the cameras, Imani watched with arms folded, her face unreadable. She wasn't here for the spotlight. She was here to make sure they couldn't bury it again. That afternoon, she returned home to find a gathering outside their building. Neighbors, strangers, some with signs that read, "Courage is contagious," and "Truth has no dress code." She paused at the steps, stunned. Her mother touched her elbow. "They're not here to hurt you," Rhonda said softly. "They're here because you gave them someone to believe in." But across the city, in a high-rise hotel suite, Trevor Blake stared at a paused video frame of Imani stepping onto the courthouse steps. Behind him, Vanessa paced in small, agitated circles. "She's still a child," Vanessa snapped. "They won't let her bring us down." Trevor's voice was low and cold. "Kids don't bring down empires," he said, "but symbols do." He turned to face her, eyes glinting. "And she's becoming one." Then he walked to the table, opened a black folder, and laid it flat. Inside, a list of judges, journalists, digital handlers. Vanessa leaned over it, her voice thin. "We bury them?" "No," Trevor said. "We bury her. Quietly, permanently, before this becomes something we can't control." But what they didn't know was that across the street, sitting in a coffee shop with her hoodie pulled low and her phone camera aimed just right, Imani Carter was recording every second, because the battle had changed shape, but she had too. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was planning, and the girl they once ignored had now become their greatest threat. By Monday morning, Whitmore Capitol was no longer a monument of prestige. It was a battlefield in disguise. The internal servers were officially under maintenance, but everyone knew better. Compliance teams worked overtime in glass-walled rooms, blinds down. Executives whispered in corners, their voices muffled by fear rather than professionalism. HR flagged employee emails for keywords like offshore, Blake, whistleblower, and Grant Whitmore. Phones buzzed with encrypted messages. Secretaries deleted their browsing history on reflex. But in the eye of the storm, Grant stood unmoved, shoulders square, gaze cold, as if he had finally made peace with the collapse of everything he had once mistaken for structure. "Let it all burn," he muttered, standing at his window. "If it means we rebuild it right." Across the city, Vanessa Whitmore sat in the morning light of their penthouse, the luxury space now echoing with absence. She cradled her phone with both hands, her voice barely above breath. "They're coming for us," she whispered into the receiver. Trevor Blake's reply crackled through the line, unfazed. "Let them. We don't run. We counterattack." "You said the papers were buried," she hissed. "They were," Trevor said flatly. "Someone dug them up." Silence stretched, then Vanessa's voice cracked. "It's not Grant who's leading this. It's her. It's the girl. She's turning the whole tower inside out." Trevor didn't reply right away. When he did, his voice was cold steel. "Then maybe it's time we remind the world who holds the real power." At school, Imani tried to keep her head down, but the hallways hummed with unspoken tension. Half her classmates stared at her like she was a ghost. The other half avoided her like she carried a contagious fire. Some whispered traitor, others hero, but she didn't respond to any of them. She walked the halls like she had walked into that boardroom, knowing she didn't belong, but walking anyway. Until she opened her locker. A note fell out, folded in perfect symmetry. She caught it midair, heart suddenly pounding. She opened it slowly. One line written in marker. "We know where you live. Stay silent. Stay safe." Her breath caught, but only for a second. She folded the paper again, slid it into her pocket, and turned. Then she walked, straight to the principal's office. 10 minutes later, Victoria Chan had secured a federal protection order for both Imani and her mother. That night, Grant Whitmore sat in his office, lights off, the city glowing behind him in lines of gold and shadow. His desk phone rang once. He picked it up. A voice unknown said only 4 words. "She's not worth it." He stared at the receiver, then slowly hung it up. Then he picked it up again and called Elena. "Can you bring in federal eyes yet?" "They're watching," she said. "But they need a public face, someone who will testify, someone big enough to shake the system." Silence. Then I will," Grant said. The following day, the press conference was standing room only. Cameras lined the edge of the room, flashes flickered, voices buzzed in the background, and then it went still. Grant took the podium, flanked by Elena Cruz and 2 federal agents. His words were slow, measured, but sharp as glass. "There are moments in life where silence becomes betrayal. I've lived in that silence for too long. I let people into this company who wore suits but carried daggers. I watched as our name became the signature on other people's crimes. And I did nothing." He looked directly at the crowd. "Until a girl with no seat at this table walked into my boardroom and showed me the fine print we ignored." Behind the curtain, Imani listened, her fists clenched, her breath steady. She didn't want applause. She wanted resolve. She didn't want fame. She wanted protection for those who would come next. That afternoon, she walked home to find a crowd outside her apartment building again. Only this time, they didn't carry signs. They carried stories. One woman came forward. "I used to clean the Fulton courthouse. I saw them shred files every Thursday." A man stepped up. My brother's company collapsed after a Blake merger. I thought it was his fault. Now I know better. They had come not just to support, but to confess, to contribute, to fight. Imani looked to her mother, who nodded. Then she stepped forward and listened. Across town, in a dim-lit business summit in a hotel ballroom, Trevor Blake strolled through donors like he still owned the world. But the atmosphere had changed. Smiles were shorter. Nods were cautious. Some people turned their backs entirely. In the corner, Vanessa approached, a phone in her hand. "He's not backing down," she said. Trevor didn't flinch. Then we stopped being quiet, too. He handed her a flash drive across a table with a list of names, reporters, judges, clerks. Vanessa stared at it. "We bury them," she said. But what they didn't see, parked across the street, was Imani sitting on a city bus, hoodie up, phone camera pressed against the window, filming everything. Because this was no longer a quiet war. This was no longer just about one clause or one company. This was about power that had gone unchallenged for too long. And the girl they thought would disappear had just pressed record. By the end of the week, Whitmore Capital no longer felt like a skyscraper. It felt like a pressure cooker. Every corridor carried tension. Every meeting room whispered suspicion. The elevators moved slower, like the weight of unspoken truths pulled them down. Interns typed quieter. Assistants wore nervous eyes. And even executives now double-checked the contracts they once signed, blindfolded. But at the center of this implosion stood Imani Carter, not blinking, not breaking. She now moved with a kind of purposeful silence that made people straighten their posture when she passed. But even with federal protection, even with Elena Cruz tightening legal barricades, the threats kept crawling through the cracks. One came in the form of a letter mailed to her school. Another, a voicemail left on Rhonda's phone in the middle of the night. Distorted audio, just breathing. Then, "You opened the wrong door." Still, Imani didn't flinch. She documented everything. She backed up every file 3 times. She studied. She watched. She remembered how they had underestimated her. Once, that morning, Grant walked into the executive boardroom, dropped a thick file on the polished wood table, and looked each of his team in the eye. "I should have seen this sooner," he said, "but I let comfort blind me. This," he gestured to the stack of documents, "is everything I should have asked questions about years ago. Offshore transfers, shell corporations, audio clips, email chains. You've got a choice," he said coldly. "Help me clean this house from the inside, or watch it burn from the outside." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one by one, they began to nod. Meanwhile, miles away, inside a quiet cafe near Midtown, Vanessa Whitmore and Trevor Blake sat in the corner booth. Her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the tension in her jaw. His usual smoothness had hardened. "He's not going quietly," she said. Trevor didn't blink. "Then maybe it's time we stop pretending." He slid a matte black folder across the table. Vanessa opened it slowly. Inside, a list of digital operatives, backdoor communication handlers, paid influencers, and the name of one federal clerk they had once helped retire. She closed it with a soft thud. "We bury them," she said. But across the street, seated behind a tinted window of a rideshare car, Imani held her phone steady, recording frame by frame. She didn't say a word, didn't move, just captured. Because this time, it wasn't just court documents or offshore accounts. It was intent. It was planning. And with proof of premeditation, Elena could elevate the case beyond fraud, into conspiracy. Back at school, Imani tried to blend in, but she had become a symbol too big to disappear. Students gawked in silence. Some whispered hero like it was a dare. Others avoided her entirely. She kept walking, until the second threat arrived, folded inside her locker. One sentence, handwritten in red ink. "Stay in your place, little girl." She stared at the note, then folded it with perfect precision and walked straight to the front office. By 4 p.m., Elena had filed an addendum to the court. Ongoing intimidation of a federal witness under the age of 18. That night, Grant received another anonymous text. "She's not worth your company." He stared at the words. Then he stood, walked to the balcony of his penthouse, and made one call. "Elena, you said they need someone big enough to shake the system." "Yes," she replied. "They're ready, but they want someone visible." "Then I'll stand with her." The next morning, the front page of the New York Times read, "Whitmore CEO testifies, teen whistleblower was right. Full justice probe initiated." At the press briefing, with cameras blinding and agents flanking the podium, Grant spoke first. "You all know the numbers, but let me tell you what matters. The person who protected this company didn't come from our boardroom. She didn't wear Armani. She didn't carry a title. She carried courage. Her name is Imani Carter. And starting today, no one ignores her again." In the back, Elena stood tall. Beside her, Rhonda reached for her daughter's hand. But Imani didn't need the squeeze of reassurance. She stood steady, spine straight, and stared down the press. It's because this wasn't just about what had happened. This was about everything they still hadn't seen. And when the first reporter asked what she wanted people to remember, she spoke clearly. "That truth doesn't ask permission, and neither do I." The courtroom was packed to the walls. Row after row of press badges, federal observers, silent CEOs in dark suits, and law students furiously scribbling on notepads. But when the bailiff called, "All rise," it wasn't the judge who made the entire room hold its breath. It was Imani Carter, walking to the stand for her final testimony, wearing a simple navy blazer, hair braided neatly, eyes sharp, steady. She didn't walk like a victim. She didn't move like someone afraid. She moved like someone who had already seen the fire and decided she would not be burned by it. Elena Cruz stood beside her as she swore in again. This time, not as a quiet whistleblower, but as the witness in the center of a national fraud case that now spanned multiple corporations, public officials, and offshore networks. Elena began softly. "Imani, you've been through a lot these last few months. Can you tell the court why you never stepped back?" Imani turned her gaze to the jury. "Because when people with power get away with things, it doesn't stop there. It gets worse. It spreads. It convinces everyone else to stay quiet. And I didn't want to be part of that lie." Elena nodded. "Did you ever feel afraid?" "Every day," Imani said. "But silence scared me more." "Why?" Elena asked gently. "Because silence is how they kept winning, until someone read the fine print." Gasps stirred across the gallery. Then came the moment that changed the verdict before it was even read. Elena handed the clerk a final piece of evidence, audio and video proof of Trevor and Vanessa at the cafe, planning the suppression of evidence, threatening influence over officials, and listing names of individuals they'd buried before. The footage played, crisp, undeniable. The judge's eyes narrowed. The jury's expressions shifted. Trevor Blake no longer leaned back in his seat. Vanessa Whitmore no longer wore her silence like armor. When Elena turned to the judge, her voice carried like the sound of a sword being drawn in open court. "Your Honor, this is not just fraud. It is calculated institutional betrayal, and it was stopped by a teenage girl who was supposed to be invisible." The defense didn't object. They couldn't. The truth had already arrived, and it was louder than their silence. After closing arguments, the jury didn't need a full day. By mid-afternoon, they returned, 12 citizens who had seen behind the curtain and were now ready to pull it down. The courtroom fell silent. The foreperson stood. On all counts of corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and financial tampering, we find the defendants guilty. The words hit like a thunderclap. Trevor Blake's shoulders collapsed for the first time. Vanessa closed her eyes, her hand trembling as it gripped the edge of the table. The judge delivered sentencing within the hour. 12 years in federal prison, no parole for the first 9, permanent disqualification from executive leadership, full seizure of offshore assets, public apology required under oath. When Imani stepped off the stand, the court didn't erupt in cheers. It didn't need to. The silence itself had changed. It was no longer the silence of fear or complicity. It was the silence of respect. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the crowd waited, reporters ready, cameras focused, but no one moved until Imani emerged. She didn't speak immediately. She scanned the crowd, her fingers curled gently at her sides. Then, when the first microphone reached toward her, she leaned forward and spoke 5 words. "This wasn't just about me." One reporter called out, "What was it about then?" Imani's voice didn't waver. "It was about every single person who ever saw something wrong and was told to look away. I didn't. I won't." And with that, she turned and walked, not into hiding, not into celebrity, but into ownership of the story they tried to erase. That night, Grant held a final press event inside Whitmore Capital's newly renamed ethics wing. "We've removed every name associated with corruption," he said, "but one name stays forever." He gestured to the newly installed bronze plaque. On it, the Imani Carter Center for Corporate Transparency. Below it, truth doesn't need a title, just a voice brave enough to say it. And though the lights dimmed, the story didn't end. Because across the country, young girls printed her name into their essays. Professors added her testimony to syllabi. Whistleblower laws began to shift. Executives began reading past page 14. And the clause that nearly destroyed an empire? It became the line that built a new one. One led not by greed, but by a girl who saw the dirt and chose to speak. She was never meant to be in that room, never meant to speak, never meant to matter. But she did. And in doing so, Imani Carter didn't just stop a fraudulent merger. She exposed the cracks beneath an empire, forced the powerful to answer for their silence, and proved that courage doesn't come with a corner office. It can come from a girl in borrowed sneakers, holding nothing but the truth. Today, the name that once went ignored now stands etched on glass walls and courtroom records. She didn't just rewrite a contract, she rewrote the rules. And for every person who's ever been told to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay in their place, she gave them a voice. Because justice doesn't ask where you're from, it listens when you refuse to back down. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Let Imani's story be more than just inspiration. Let it be a reminder that sometimes the biggest changes start with the quietest voice in the room. Like, comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that prove the truth always finds a way to be heard.